That $2 million mark can still be a bit of a grind.
It's pretty scary. It makes you ask a lot of questions about yourself, about your business, about your team. Can also trigger like impulse reaction actions. Oh, I've got to fix this right away. Down a little rabbit hole of something that actually isn't going to drive any value back to like your operation to then prevent this happening again in the future. It can be quite a challenging time once you start to experience that attrition. And for 99% of businesses, it's an inevitable thing that will happen because your focus can't be on everything all at once whilst you're hustling and grinding and growing systems and people and make sure the right talent's present and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, if you're listening, it's coming. Your days of doom are coming.
Preach it. I think there's two things though as well. Like one, if you expect it, it's not such a bad hit, where sometimes in that first part of revenue growth, you've never experienced a downturn. With the amount of effort you're putting in, I feel like it's nearly incomprehensible that a client would want to leave you. It becomes a personal thing, and you're like, oh my gosh, like what have I done? I failed. You know, it's all doom and gloom, and like. But I think it's just something to be expected, right? Like I don't want to put it out there that you're always going to have churn, but clients' situations change. Like it's not something sometimes you're trying to control the uncontrollable, and it's just not healthy. You may as well just ride the natural motion of business rather than fight it and blame your model and yourself and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, there's no value in and then questioning your viability in the market. Does what we sell actually have an impact anywhere? Because in that moment, you know, you've just gone from $1.5 million a year to 1.45, and the whole journey to that point has just been completely forgotten about.
Yeah.
You know, and all those thousands of conversations you've had and all of these people you've identified that, you know, they need resource, they need strong talent, strong skill sets, is out of the window and that one client churned, which is quite interesting.
A big thing I like to look back on is sometimes like what would be the thing that I would do differently, you know, not as a point of regret or saying, you know, I regret how this went, but business it's not just, especially as founder-led, it's not just business. There's families involved. There's, you know, partners, extended families, and sacrifices that need to be made. One thing I definitely took away from now looking back is something I would do differently is I would have an assistant on my right, like as my right-hand man, as soon as I had revenue. And that's for a couple of reasons from my own learnings. Is there are so many things that I see now having an assistant that founders do absolutely zero value add at all. Writing proposals that are copy paste, following up emails, sorting your calendar. Like there's absolutely no value in a founder doing that. When you actually look at the amount of time it takes, the amount of energy it takes, because lots of founders hate doing it as well. Having a company assistant that supports, you know, your wider management team, or having an executive assistant to like clone yourself and help train and all that kind of stuff is something I would do so much earlier. It's nearly unbelievable how silly I was not to kind of embrace that when we have the vehicle of offshoring like literally at our fingertips. It was kind of like incomprehensible that we haven't.
Yeah, completely consumed with helping everybody else free up time and brain space.
Yeah.
Whilst little old us buying hours from the back of the sun, basically.
Smashing keys, trying to get proposals out, and just that dread of having a backlog of things that you know you could get done by someone else. But I think another thing of that inside of that is also like having the systems to support that kind of person and all that kind of stuff. So there's obviously more to it that we've learned. But I don't know, where do you want to go from here? What's hot on your mind looking at something like this?
When you look at that May 2022 to January 2023 in our graph, you know, we have peaks, we have some significant troughs there, like business retraction. Obviously, we set up, you know, during COVID, so that was quite an interesting time just to start a business and the conversations that you had. As we start growing, it starts to retract again, and obviously there are significant factors with that that lead to client churn and, you know, market conditions and all that sort of stuff that also come into play. But I think what would be quite interesting to touch on the strategies that we deployed to get from, you know, the $1 to $2 million mark from a growing revenue perspective whilst going through some of these tough, challenging times. And I guess to kick that off, for us, something that's always been it's always been present in our growth journey is that of like referrals for business. And although it hasn't been a super concentrated strategy, which definitely needs to be as we continue growing and growing, because it's the easiest way to grow revenue, it is something that we have been conscious to. It's something that I think a lot of business owners out there also probably do overlook in terms of growing that top line. Just touching on how we've implemented like referral business and how we capitalize on it to grow out accounts, grow out relationships, grow out rapport and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I suppose referrals are an interesting one because it's sometimes the hardest thing to ask for, right? And it's really simple. Like, hey, do you know anyone who's in your situation that we could potentially help? But for whatever reason, we've found it quite difficult to systemize and build a process around. However, we do get some very good organic referrals. I think some of our biggest clients have come from just knowing someone, and we've also delivered for some very large enterprises, right? Like we've built some teams for some pretty well-known names in the Southern Hemisphere, even now moving into the Northern Hemisphere. So it's an important strategy. And if you're delivering for your clients, it kind of happens very organically. I think the thing that founders and they don't embrace is just how easy it can be to do that. Now, we're lucky in the sense now that we have a client success manager, she's killer. And she's onto it. Like she is always asking, hey, who else do you know? Are there any other businesses that you know in the space? And, we've had a 10 FT deal somewhat come through our door just from asking for that. Now that could be a multi-6-figure contract for us, just from that. That's definitely one strategy. It's not something that I think we've nailed by any means. I think where we've done really well and where we saw the most growth, third quarter 2023 to
the end of 2022 was when we had like the 10 FTE in December, when all businesses are closed, but it was a real rampant offshoring. Yeah,
those 2 quarters were quite interesting because something that we really, really nailed was, and what was working really well was cold outreach, like mass cold outreach. And I think that was definitely the revenue engine that took us over that $2 million mark very quickly, as you can kind of see in that graph. I don't think there's a business in this world that couldn't implement some type of cold outreach, right?
I think it's definitely more viable for like your B2B or service-based businesses, definitely. Too familiar, I guess, with like the whole product-based business. And when you're selling B2C, that's pretty hard to call out. How do you collect information? How do you validate information when it is a B2C outreach strategy? I'm not
socials,
not my expertise.
Probably be more a social thing, and new followers on Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. Definitely for that B2B space. That revenue drive was 100% driven on cold outreach, getting in front of people and just asking if they've got the issue that we can solve essentially.
And we were doing significant volume too.
Yeah, we were sending about 5,000 emails a day.
Okay, which is nuts, really. It's crazy. And then obviously, and not everything there converted. Our sales cycle can be months at a time. And I think that's why, we saw an uptick at the end of 2022, but then just carried on closing the start of 2023 up till probably midway through 2023. And then that's when we decided to redesign our whole sales process, which has been a bit of a journey. I think
an important distinction to make there is $0 to $1 million market feels like your close rate is 90%. Probably was. Everyone we were talking to, we could sell to, and then when that starts kind of cooling down a little bit, you don't have that warm market to talk to. You have to obviously be selling to people that you don't know, who you've got to build rapport with, who, you're just a kind of stranger off the street. I think a big mindset shift in that journey there was understanding that close rates are going to drop. Like the biggest thing you need to build is pipeline, meaning like number of opportunities, because you're going to have a smaller percentage of them close, right? It's just something that founders need to understand, especially in the service-based business, like we are.
So we've touched on not to a million. We've talked about the hustle. We've talked about belief systems. We've then talked about, I guess, systemization from 1 to 2. We've talked about how we've driven revenue, what channels we've used, referrals. We've talked about cold emails. And that kind of brings you present day within the last 12 months when, particularly for you, your whole world has kind of changed in terms of like priorities and time, energy. Obviously, Archie arriving into the world, and a couple of years before that we had Mateus and Carson, and now we've just had Azra. So we kind of got this concoction of fatherhood responsibilities, which then lead you into the onus of how can we still deliver great service and experience when we don't have as much time, just naturally. And I think that's quite a relevant topic, because I'm going to assume, there's going to be a portion of our listeners that do have children and are trying to balance fatherhood, motherhood, growing businesses, dealing with customers, all this sort of stuff that kind of happens day to day. So yeah, what sort of impact has becoming a father had on your perspectives, your values, and essentially like running Amped day to day, and then, a couple of the other businesses that we have?
Getting to that $2 million mark can still be a bit of a grind. And I think for what we didn't do very well is build out the systems and process so that other people could do what we were inherently doing because we were founders, right? Just that innate founder, you just get in, get it done, doesn't work when you start hiring staff, because you can't just expect someone to know what to do, how to do it, at the intensity, at what cadence and all that kind of stuff. So as much as this is a decline through revenue, I think what this really highlights is the operational debt that was inside the business. What does operational debt mean? It means lack of process, lack of systems, lack of documentation, lack of automation, lack of software, wrong software, like making the wrong hires, hiring the wrong consultants. Like there's a big operational debt piece that we have experienced over the last 8 months. That has been, very mentally challenging when you start adding kids. Or you added 3, the last 3 years. Any complexities, if there's any complexities in the family unit, that also adds to it. I think this has been a really, really big learning curve for us, especially as you grow, you have to, it's critical to the business continuity to build out the systems that are actually running the business and have that kind of documentation. And now my team is being hounded ad nauseum to build out their playbooks of how their job should be run, at what cadence, at what frequency, and what tasks and what SOPs and all that kind of stuff. Like I am just constantly reminding them for it. I would say it's been pivotal. What's kind of pulled us back up a little bit is actually just getting back into the space where, as a founder, I know that, okay, we've somewhat plugged these holes. That's caused a bit of churn here. Now I can actually confidently sell into a business that can support the next level of growth. And this is, I would say, a very common trend in sub $10 million businesses, as this kind of ebb and flow of quite decent growth, and then somewhat the operations can't support the revenue is sitting there, and then just by natural attrition and potentially some, mismanagement of clients or whatever, you see this dip start to happen. The important thing is, again, to catch it, right? And not let the mindset go, we're screwed, And if you've got healthy margins, you're okay. If you don't have healthy margins, you're absolutely screwed. I think it's the culmination of a lot of good or bad decisions are either going to make or break a business in this kind of stage.
I distinctly remember how I felt. It was actually more towards the back end of 2023. So when we obviously dipped under 2 mil, felt okay, dip in a bit further, and it happened pretty quick. Fuck, it sent the shit. I was like, what is going on? Whole business is at risk, all these kind of stories, limiting belief. And it took you to take a stand for, well, actually, let's reflect on what's actually happened here. What are the drivers for it? Okay, how can we now rebuild, bring somebody in dedicated to managing that client success piece who just had no time and capacity to do it? Now a full onus on building playbooks, hence the name of this podcast. It was the pivotal trigger really for our journey over the last 3 or 4 months. Been pretty intense around playbook stuff that you've led. And I think without that, and taking the time to acknowledge that, and then pull the time into building out the playbooks and building out the plugs to put in the gap, you will just see business bounce from growth to attrition, and you just kind of end up fluctuating. And then if you decide that you're just going to have a breakdown one day and you don't bounce back, then business can very quickly just start to fall off a cliff. And once was at $2 million a year, all of a sudden you're rescuing to put food on the table. The reality for a lot of business owners that fall into that trap.
100%. It's such a mindset thing, right? Like for me, it's been really cool to have a co-founder to bounce ideas off, right? Like we've got different strengths in the business, and sometimes you're going down that path of we're screwed. Sometimes I'm going down that path of we're screwed. But if we didn't have each other in that sense, or some type of, it doesn't have to be a co-founder, but I think some type of support network to bounce those moments off, it would have been a lot more slippery than it was, I would say. It's been painful, but it has also, and what that graph doesn't show is the net revenue going down, but the change in clients as well. So the revenue was kind of going down, but we were replacing clients as well as kind of like having that negative revenue. So there was also fresh kind of client energy in the business. It was just that some existing clients, because of, just time and energy, were kind of getting left behind, or a big thing was we've started to encounter new issues that we hadn't encountered before. We had bigger teams. We had, there was a lot of kind of stuff going on in that space.
A massive plus side is we managed to get rid of some really low margin clients.
Exactly. Because
in that scenario, you're almost better off having a lower revenue figure, but posting more margin per contract than living on your high horse with $2 million and not much margin.
And eating beans.
That turned into a bit of a conversation around decline in business and operationally why things fall to bits sometimes. Wasn't too much kind of reflection on fatherhood and challenges of parenthood and entrepreneurship. From that perspective, like for me specifically, what I find quite difficult, obviously we both work from home full time, and now I've got 3 terrors in the house constantly. Angelic children. It's quite hard to get into a deep state of working from home. And I think after 12 months of like euphoria of like, oh, I get to work from home and the reality of that actually kicks in, and it's way more difficult than it's perceived to be to actually silo deep time to record a podcast, for example. That's been quite challenging. Obviously, pre-children, we could just pour 12, 14 hours a day into business and Zoom calls and just getting shit done. Whereas now, there's the wake up at 5 a.m, which is always delicious. There's the kindy run. There is the kindy pickup at 1 o'clock. There's dinner and beds 5 till 7. So all of a sudden, for me personally, I've lost 6-7 hours a day, albeit it's now incredible with kids and satisfaction, fulfillment that comes from that. The cost to that is what happens in terms of business output, time pressure in that space. Well, that's been a big challenge for me.
I think, it's so true. But I think that's also only relevant if you haven't built the systems to duplicate yourself in those areas, right? And that's where I think I was tying it to, is like, if you don't do that, then that experience of spending time with the kids seems at a loss of the business, where I think for people listening, they could learn from that mistake and go, actually, I'm going to systemize an absolute living daylight out of this, so that there's processes up the yin yang. And the moment I step out, someone else just steps in to complete this playbook. And that's where I suppose the business is what we're kind of moving towards more now.
Yeah, definitely. An observation of like your environment since you brought on an EA to tell you when to breathe and eat and wash yourself.
She does. And what to eat as well. Yeah, which has just been tomatoes and capsicum.
Puts it on your Google Calendar. It's more so that being taken care of, and say your inbox and that sort of stuff. Like when you do get time with Archie, like you can be fully present with Archie and not worry about a client feedback email coming in or something that you've missed. I think that's been quite a refreshing thing and realization just for me even. Because at the end of the day, all they want is for you to be present and just give you time and attention. Like that's it.
It's like, who was I talking to? I was talking to a friend about this because I see him he's so present with his daughter. It's tough because when you're moving from, I've found it quite difficult because when I was moving from such a high pace, just get something done on your phone and all that kind of stuff, you forget that you're not actually doing anything very well. Like, well,
Yeah,
I've
yeah, yeah.
got like, I'm replying to this client, but I'm actually thinking about another client while I'm actually doing this and I'm cooking dinner at the same time. Like the dinner's not being cooked. I'm not present with whoever's in the house, and the client's not getting the best response. And so you add a child to the mix and they start seeing you on your phone when you're present with them. I
Yeah.
just saw it be, I could see how slippery that slope was, from
Yeah.
parenting point of view. And I was like, nah, I can't have this be how I start, because they will pick up on that very, very quickly. So
Yeah, the phone example is a strong one. I think the other thing as well, personally speaking from personal experience here, is that if you are trying to like split your focus, I find it very easy to perceive the children as like an inconvenience, like disrupting what I'm trying to get done, which is completely unfair when you actually think about it. So those systems in the back end to deal with anything that, needs to be dealt with whilst you're not present on the business means you can pour more into the children, which then gives you more back from that kind of relationship and love and topping up the cup there, so that then when you come back to the business, you're actually in a way better space to be productive. So that's been the big realizations for me, but that took 2.5 years.
yeah, and like I remember having that conversation with you in the Gold Coast. I think Oren was there as well, and we were talking about, because it's not sometimes just a time point of view, like a time perspective of I've got X hours to do this thing. It's like, where's your brain actually at? And I remember we were sitting at Rick Shaw's for lunch, and you had an email come in, and it was playing on the back of your mind. So you weren't kind of there with our friend. You were kind of like, your brain was somewhere else. You're physically there, and I'm so guilty of doing that as well. Like just being somewhere but not being somewhere, and the cost of that is neither of the things you're there for are getting done, and the email's not getting replied to, and I wasn't present, and so it's a tough thing to build. But yeah, like you said, bringing on that EA, and this is why I said I should have done it way earlier, and giving them the playbooks to do the things that, one, I shouldn't be doing, and two, can actually, so they can actually support me be more present with Archie and my time and all that kind of stuff, has been a game changer. I think every founder should have one.
Totally agree. And I think this could be the perfect spot to kind of wrap this up in terms of this episode. And I'll pass that over to you because you're just really angelic with your words.
Angelic?
Yeah, I think it's quite an angelic.
It's cool to kind of, and just doing it, the actual reflection, this journey as well. Sometimes we don't actually sit down and pat ourselves on the back or even conceptualize what we went through. So it's cool to hear both people's perspectives there. But I hope for anyone listening that it benefits you in some way. If there's something you want us to double click on or kind of go more into in depth, whether that be outbound revenue engines or, outsourcing and why businesses should adopt it earlier, leave a comment below. Subscribe. That obviously helps everyone out here. We'll see you next week.